Hey everybody, and welcome back to the board meeting. Today we are going to be looking at the fourth big box expansion for Marvel Champions, one of my favorite games today. This is Sinister Motives, and Sinister Motives follows the same formula that all the other expansions have followed in the past. There are going to be 2 heroes that it comes with, and there are going to be 5 different villain scenarios that you're going to be going up against. I won't be talking too much about the campaign stuff because it follows the same formula. There's not that much of a campaign. You're going to be adding a couple cards here and there. You're going to be doing some little things, little tweaks to the scenarios, but for the most part, it is basically just 5 standalone scenarios. It is what it is, but I won't be talking about that part of it too much because it's the same old if you've played the other 3 campaign expansions. So let's just go and talk about each of these heroes and 5 of the villain scenarios quickly. I'm going to be trying to do it relatively fast. I'm not going to try to make this an hour-long video. I just want to go and explain some of the mechanics that come with them and what makes them a little bit different. So let's start with the 2 heroes right away. First we have Miles, the Miles Morales version of Spider-Man, and his alter ego form. He's got 9 hit points to start with, a recovery of 4, and he's got a response. After you change to this form, shuffle 1 Spider-Man card from your discard pile into your deck. And I actually kind of like this special ability as well. It's not like the most eye-popping special ability, but especially like later on in the game when you've gone through quite a bit of your deck and grabbing one of those big, nasty hitting cards, putting that into a deck that you only have like 10 or 15 cards in, you know you're going to be pulling up one of your big cards again. And if you can do that 2, 3, 4 times in the game, you're going to be getting those nasty cards out pretty fast. So let's go over to his Spider-Man version, his hero side. He's got a 2 thwart, 2 attack, 2 defense, pretty standard overall. And he's got 2 specials on the bottom. He's got the Venom Blast special, deal 2 damage to an enemy, stun that enemy. And he's got the Spider Camouflage special, gives Spider-Man a tough status card and confuse an enemy. This Spider-Man is going to be all about putting status cards on himself and the enemy. He's going to be constantly stunning, confusing the enemy, giving himself status cards. And I'm just going to go through a couple of his cards, and it kind of deals with that main mechanic of that. So let's go through his 2 big thwart and attack cards. He's got the Swing In. It's a hero action thwart. Remove 4 threat from a scheme if you paid for this card using Science Resource. Resolve Spider-Man's Spider Camouflage ability, which again is confusing the enemy and giving yourself a tough status card. We've got the Web Shot card, which is deal 4 damage to an enemy if you paid for this card using a Lightning Resource. Resolve Spider-Man's Venom ability, which is doing 2 more damage plus stunning that enemy. So you see, and a lot of these cards are similar to just doing those kind of things to it. And then we have Arachnobatics, a hero action attack, deal 2 damage to an enemy. If that enemy has a stun status card, deal 3 additional damage to it. If that enemy has a confused status card, deal 3 additional damage to it. So this card, if all the scenario falls into the right place, you're going to be doing an attack of 8. So you're going to be doing some nasty damage if you time this card right. I like these cards. Spider-Man is pretty straightforward. You know what your objective is for this. You're going to be putting those status cards out on him. And Griff's walking around like he does every time I start recording. So let's go to the other hero, which is Gwen Stacy, or Ghost Spider, or Spider-Gwen, whatever you want to call her. But she's got a recovery of 3. She starts with 10 hit points. And for an action, choose to either shuffle Ticket to the Multiverse from your discard pile into your deck, or ready George Stacy. And I'll get to those cards here in a second. But let's go over to her hero side first. So Ghost Spider, thwart 1, attack 2, defense 3. So she's got that high defense. Dizzying Reflexes. Response. After resolve an interrupt or responsibility on an event, ready Ghost Spider. And that is what she's going to be doing constantly. She's constantly playing events cards in response to what is happening on the game board. So Ghost Spider is going to be constantly playing cards in response to things. She has lots of her cards are responses to things that are happening on the board, responses to her attacking, her thwarting, the enemy attacking, canceling the enemy's activation, canceling a revealed encounter card, stuff like that. Let's go through some of her actual cards, though. And I said we'd go through George Stacy, that talked about on her regular card. George Stacy, events attached to George Stacy may be played as if they were in your hand. And as an action, exhaust George Stacy, attach one event from your hand face down here. So if you don't have enough resources or something, or it doesn't make sense to play that event for this round, you can just attach it to George Stacy, play it next round. Interesting card. Ticket to the Multiverse. Remove Ticket to the Multiverse from the game, discard your hand, shuffle your discard pile back into your deck, draw up to your hand size, and ready each Ghost Spider card you control. So this card can kind of, if you're like really close to the end of your deck and you get this card, you can get those cards back in there and basically redo your deck, making sure you don't get that extra encounter card when you go through an entire deck. Also, it's got 2 wild resources on it. So let's go to a couple of her cards, a couple of her attacks and stuff. And her hero response here for Ghost Kick is hero response attack after Ghost Spider uses a basic power, deal 6 damage to an enemy. And we got Phantom Flip, which is basically the thwart version of that. Hero response after Ghost Spider uses a basic power, remove 5 threat from a scheme. And like I said, she's going to have quite a few cards in hers that respond to different things. She's got cards that respond to enemies attacking. She's got cards that respond to, you can just cancel the enemy's activation altogether for that round. You can do quite a few things. I like, out of these 2 heroes, Ghost Spider is my favorite because I like that she is more involved, where the Spider-Man, which I like as well, he's more straightforward. You know, you're going straight forward, stunning that enemy, confusing him, giving yourself tough status cards, where Ghost Spider, you are paying very close attention to what the board is because an event happens and you're like, okay, I've got a card to respond to that event. And when you respond, when you do play those response cards, you can reactivate your Ghost Spider, untap her. So I like her more so, but I think both of these heroes are good. Out of all the campaign expansions that have come out for the duo of heroes, this is my favorite duo of them. Because the other boxes usually have one hero that I like and one hero that I could really care less about. This one, I like both of them, but Ghost Spider is my favorite out of those 2. So let's go over to the villains, actually. Go through each of the villains pretty quickly, and the 5 villains. And the first villain scenario is Sandman. Sandman is a scheme of 1, attack of 2. It's got 16 hit points per player you're playing against them. And I should say, I went through this entire campaign playing solo, but I played 2-handed. So I played as both of these heroes 2-handedly. And I didn't mess with their decks at all. I wanted to see how powerful the base decks were. And let me say, the base decks were put together really well. They handled against these villains sufficiently. Pretty sufficiently, I should say. So let's go to the Sandman, his special ability. Sand Blast, Force Interrupt. When Sandman attacks you, that attack deals indirect damage. If your identity takes any amount of damage from the attack, resolve the Surging Sands ability on City Streets. And all of his stuff is going to be doing with these Surging Sand abilities. So let's go to that City Streets card that he just talked about. So Surging Sands special, place 1 sand counter here. Discard cards from the top of the encounter deck equal to the number of sand counters here. And so he's going to, when you place a sand counter there, you're going to discard cards from the encounter deck equal to the number of sand counters on there. And so you're going to be going through that encounter, that villain deck, really fast. And when you go through those villain decks, you know, you get +1 of those acceleration tokens, meaning the main scheme is going to be going through that faster and faster. And the more of those sand counters that are on there, you're going to be discarding large amounts. But you can deal with those sand counters. By the bottom, it says exhaust a character you control, remove sand counters from here equal to the character's attack. So basically you're attacking the city streets with a character you control to remove those sand counters. I think it's relatively easy to manage this. Make sure it's not going out of control. Or you can try to ignore it altogether and just go straight head first into Sandman, trying to take him out. before there's too many acceleration tokens. It's kind of like a timing mechanism there. It's interesting for sure, and this is kind of going to be a theme of this campaign, at least for the first three characters, that you're going to be going through decks faster than you normally would than other villains, because this one you're going to be going through that encounter deck pretty fast if you're not dealing with those surging sands. Let's go through a couple of his cards. So there's a Sandstorm Treachery card. When revealed, deal X indirect damage among players, divided as you choose, where X is equal to the number of sand counters on city streets. If there are no sand counters on city streets, place 3 sand counters on it and shuffle this card back into the encounter deck. He's got a Sand Clone card, which has got a Scheme of 1. It's a minion card. Scheme of 1, attack of X. X is equal to the number of sand counters on city streets. So if you haven't been dealing with those sand counters, this guy could attack for a ton. Say you got 5, 6 counters on there, and you're like, I'm not going to worry about it. And one of these minions, these sand clones, comes out, they're going to be an issue unless you deal with them. When defeated, you resolve the Surging Sands ability on the city streets. So, yeah, you're going to be constantly putting tokens on there. So it's a wise idea to deal with them, as don't let them get too big, I should say. So let's go to the second scenario, the second villain scenario, which is Venom. Venom is the first version of him, because I always start on first version, especially my first playthrough of these campaigns. He's got a Scheme of 1, attack of 2, 17 hit points per player you're playing against, and it's a symbiote, and it comes in with a tough status card, and it's got Vengeance for its special ability. Forced response: after you attack and damage Venom with a card you control, meaning your identity, place 1 face down boost card on your identity. So anytime you're attacking Venom or dealing damage to him with one of your identity cards, he's going to give you a boost card. And when he attacks, you're going to have to take those boost cards and put them and add them to his already 1 boost card. So he might get 3, 4 boost cards at a time, and he's going to attack for big time. Then he might be attacking for 10, 11. So if you're not putting an ally in front of him and basically just sacrificing them, he's going to take you out pretty quickly. But there is the bell tower location that comes in, and it's double-sided. It's got the quiet side, which it starts on, and for the bell tower, if there are at least 3 per player chime counters on here, flip this card. Interrupt: when any amount of damage would be dealt to Venom by an attack, you may place that many chime counters here instead. So it's an optional thing. So basically, you can attack the bell tower if you want, or Venom. But if you flip it, you're going to get some benefits. And so for the bell tower, when it is on the ringing side, you increase all damage Venom takes by 1. If there are no chime counters on here, you're going to have to flip it back over to the quiet side of the bell tower. So for the forced interrupt, when Venom's attack would deal any amount of damage to an identity, remove that many chime counters from here. For each chime counter removed this way, prevent 1 of that damage. So I think it's a good idea to bring it to this ringing side. I've heard some people say that they just ignore this card and they don't worry about it much. I feel like it's a good idea to flip this card, because you're going to get +1 to all of your attacks to Venom, which is nice. But it also, if he does attack you, and if he does do one of those massive attacks, you just have to remove a chime counter on here per damage that you would take to prevent that. So if you've got a ton of damage on here, you could end up saving yourself if you have flipped it over. So I think it's a good idea to do that. So yeah, Venom's interesting, and like Sandman in the previous scenario where he went through all the encounter deck pretty fast, you're going to go through the encounter deck really fast with Venom as well, because you're putting all those extra boost cards on yourself. So you're going through those much quicker than normal. So let's go to our third scenario of this campaign, which is Mysterio. Mysterio is a very interesting scenario. So Mysterio is going to have 15 hit points per character, and he's got a Scheme of 2, attack of 1. His special thing is Seeds of Fear. Forced response: after you resolve a boost card during Mysterio's activation, place that card in your discard pile if it has the illusion trait. Now, I think this is a very interesting mechanic of, when you reveal a boost card and it's got the illusion trait, that's going into your deck. You are going to have his cards into your deck now. And we've had heroes that put their card into the encounter deck before, the villain's deck. But I believe this is the first time a villain is going to be putting their cards into our deck. I think that's really cool. That's very interesting. And let's go to the main scheme of his to kind of explain what's going on for that. So for the Maze of Mirrors main scheme, Forced Interrupt, when you would draw or discard an encounter card from your deck, deal it to yourself as a face-down encounter card, draw one card. So you are basically going to get a ton of encounter cards for this scenario. It's going to happen quite a bit, pretty regularly actually, in this game. And I think that's really interesting because you're drawing cards and you're just kind of hoping that you don't get that encounter card, that because you might have 3-4 encounter cards put into your deck, and yeah, you're just hoping that those encounter cards don't come up, or at least if they do come up, they're not too terrible. So you're going to get those encounter cards plus the other encounter cards that you're going to regularly get every single turn. So you're going to have to deal with those. Let's go to a couple of their cards. A couple of his cards. For the first one, it's a Treachery card. It's Fearmonger. This is a Surge. When revealed, discard your hand, draw up to your hand size. And like I said before, there's kind of a theme for these first three villains of going through decks quicker. Mysterio is going to make you go through your deck quicker. He's going to have several of the cards that make you discard your cards. And there's a couple reasons for that. The more cards that you discard from your deck means the more likely you're going to reveal one of his encounter cards that are in your deck. Plus, once you go through your deck, which you will for this scenario, most likely, you're going to be dealt another encounter card. So like I said, it's a theme of these first three is going through cards quickly, whether they're the encounter deck or your own hero deck. And there is also a boost ability on this card. Choose to either spend 2 science resources or deal this card to yourself as a face-down encounter card. We got the Deja Vu Treachery card. It's Peril. While you are resolving this card, other players cannot help you. When revealed, choose to either take 1 damage or place 1 threat on the main scheme. Shuffle Deja Vu back into any player's deck. And when you boost, it's revealed as a boost, reveal this card. And it doesn't seem like that bad, getting 1 damage to you or placing 1 threat on a scheme. But when this card comes out 3, 4, 5 times in a game, it's kind of annoying. It's an annoying card. It's not like horrible, but you're like, this card has ended up doing 5 damage to my character in this game. So it doesn't seem like that it's bad, but it can add up, especially the fact that there are multiple Deja Vus, and if you get both of them all into your deck and you're just constantly revealing them, you're like, okay, here's the damage, putting a threat on the scheme, putting a threat on this scheme. Yeah, it can get rather annoying. So that is Mysterio, and I'm going to say Mysterio is probably my favorite scenario in this game. Let's go to the next scenario, though, which is what this box is named after. This is the Sinister Six scenario, where you are going to actually play against all 6 different villains. And we've had a scenario before, the Wrecking Crew, where you're playing against multiple villains. And this is going to work similar to that in a way. But basically, at the start of the scenario, you're going to put out 1 villain per player plus an additional one. So if you're playing 2 players like I was, you are going to put out 3 villains to start the game. And these villains actually have a very low health. The health for these only range from 10 to 7, and they don't add up for however many players you're playing at. They're always going to be 10 to 7. So they're almost like not like a villain, but more like a very tough minion that is out on the board. But when you do kill these villains, they don't go out of the game. They just set aside. And I'll just read one of the villains for you. Let's do Scorpions. Scorpion only has a hit point of 10, which is high for this scenario. He's got a scheme of 0, attack of 3, and a forced response. After Scorpion attacks and damages you, stun a character you control. Move the active counter to the next villain in activation order. So these villains are going to attack, then it's going to go to the next villain and the next villain. So it's not going to be the same villain just going over and over and over again. but it is when defeated, remove 4 threats from a side scheme, 7 threats instead if no other villain is in play. And I'll get to the side scheme, and you might be wondering why it's a side scheme, and that's how all these villains are. It's remove 4 threats from a side scheme if you defeat them, or 7 if they are the last villain that's on the board. But let's go to the main scheme. And so for the main scheme, it's ambush special. Choose a set-aside villain at random, put that villain into play, and place the active counter on it. In expert mode, place 2 threat on light at the end, which is the side scheme we're going to be talking about. And forced interrupt. When a villain would activate, if no villain is in play, resolve the card's ambush ability, so basically putting out another villain. Continue this activation. So let's look at that side scheme that we talked about. It's light at the end, and it's a permanent card, hinder 10. 10 threat per player goes on it, plus an additional 10. So if you're playing two players, you're putting 30 threat on here to start with. And so for the players cannot win unless they escape. And so you're not trying to kill the villains. The point of the game is not to kill the villains. I mean, you are killing or taking them out, but that's not how you win this game. So forced interrupt, when the last threat is removed from this scheme, resolve the ambush ability on the main scheme, flip this card. The players can escape on the other side. So we're trying to escape these guys. So on the other side, it starts with 5 threat on it, and it's got 10 threat per player again. The players cannot win unless they escape. And this one, you're going to get an extra encounter card too when it's on this side. And force interrupt, when the last threat is removed from this scheme, the players escape and win the game. So that's how you're winning the game in the Sinister Six scenario, is just taking out all the threat. And it's an interesting thing because you can remove threat by just, doing your thwarting ability. But probably the better way to remove threat on that side scheme, the light at the end, is to be taking out these villains, because you're removing 4 threat at a time. Or you could be doing the 7 threat if they're the last villain in play. And you do want to manage. You don't, because there's going to be villains constantly coming out on the board. You don't want to let there to be a lot of villains. You don't want all 6 of those villains out for sure, because there are cards in their deck that they're going to add so much attack to this attack for however many villains are out on the board. Things like that. So the more villains that are out there, the more powerful these villains are. So you want to manage them that. And it's not hard to take them out. I mean, being 7 to 10 health for each of them, it's pretty easy to take out at least 1 per round of these villains. And so as far as difficulty, I didn't think this was that difficult of a mission. And I should say, out of all of these missions, none of them are impossible. I think the Sandman is the easiest scenario. I would say probably Mysterio is the second hardest. And the last one we're talking about is Venom Goblin. I think that is by far the hardest. But it kind of does ramp up throughout this campaign, going from easier, going a little bit harder, finally until we get to Venom Goblin, which we'll talk about now. So Venom Goblin has got an attack of 2, a scheme of 2. It's got 16 hit points per player on the first card of it. It's got steady, meaning that's going to kind of affect the Spider-Man, because for steady you need 2 status cards for it to basically affect that villain. So infest the city. Forced response. After Venom Goblin activates against you, move the glider counter to the main scheme with the least threat. Choose to either place 2 threat on that scheme or resolve its special ability. And you're thinking to which main scheme? There are 3 main schemes in this one, which is it's going to play somewhat similarly to the Sinister Six scenario, meaning like how there's different villains and they're activating against you and you're constantly rotating which enemy is attacking. This one, you're constantly rotating what is the main scheme. So as you can see here, we have 3 different main schemes that are going to be out on the board at all times, and they're going to act as a main scheme. If let's go through each of these though, because it's going to change each one. The main scheme is going to be the scheme that's got the lowest amount of threat on it currently. and each of these are going to do different things. They're going to have different specials on them, and I'll go through the specials on each of them rather quickly. So for Upper Manhattan, if you're having to resolve this special ability on this main scheme, the special, discard 1 card from your hand. If a symbiote environment is in play, discard the top 4 cards of your deck. And a symbiote environment, you can see for this one, it needs 10 threat per player, and if it does, it flips over to this, and it becomes an environment with a symbiote. It's a symbiote location now, and revealed, move the glider counter and each acceleration token from here to the main scheme with the least threat. If there are at least 2 symbiote environments in play, the players lose the game. So if you flip over at least 2 of these main schemes, you're going to lose the game against Venom Goblin. So the other specials on the other main schemes are special, take 2 indirect damage. If a symbiote environment is in play, take one additional indirect damage. So you can see if you've already flipped over one of these environments, it gets harsher and harsher as you're playing on. And for the last scheme, the special, place 1 threat on each scheme. If a symbiote environment is in play, place 1 additional threat on this scheme. And so yeah, it's an interesting balancing act of whether you're trying to thwart all of these schemes, removing all these threat that are on it, and it's going to be a difficult balancing act between thwarting and attacking Venom. And let me show the second part of the Venom Goblin card when you get to the second act. It's an attack of 3, scheme of 2. It's got steady and it comes in with toughness. But when you reveal this one, deal 2 face down encounter cards to each player. And the forced response after Venom Goblin activates against you, move the glider counter to the main scheme with the least threat, resolve its special ability. So it's pretty much the same as the first. But getting those 2 encounter cards dealt to you, to each player during that, plus you're going to get your encounter cards during that phase, the enemy phase. So you're probably resolving at least 3 encounter cards when you flip over to that the second Venom Goblin card, which can be devastating. This is the only scenario in this game that I would say I had quite a bit of difficulty beating with these base heroes that I played as. This is difficult. The Goblin's going to hit you hard, but you're going to have to deal with 3 main schemes rather than the traditional just 1. There's constantly threat being put on them, and resolving those special abilities can just be, it's just hindering you constantly hitting you back, breaking you down. So yeah, I think this one, it took me until the 3rd time I played it in order for me to beat this scenario. I think it's the hardest scenario in the game by far. Maybe some people disagree with me, but I did have difficulty with this one, and I didn't have that much difficulty with the other ones. So let's just break this down, what my final thoughts are on this campaign now that I've gone through all of those. Now, each of these heroes I like, each of these scenarios I like. I like this. This is my favorite of the big box campaign expansions out of all 4 of them that have been released. It's my favorite, and by a good margin, actually, because all 5 of these villain scenarios I think are legitimate ones that I'm going to be playing regularly, or at least breaking out. Where as far as the other campaign expansions, there's always been a couple of the scenarios that I'm like, yeah, this is, after I play the campaign, this is probably the last time I'm going to play against this villain or be interested in playing against this villain. Both of these heroes are heroes that I will be happy to play as when playing outside of this campaign. This is going to get a 9 out of 10 for me. I really like this box. And the only reason it doesn't get 10 out of 10 is because the complaint that I've had before is that there is no story in these campaigns. They have such an opportunity to put great story into these campaigns. It's Marvel. It's got a rich history of great stories, great comics, and everything like that. And yet for these campaigns, and just altogether in Marvel Champions, they have had very lackluster story going into these scenarios. And for this campaign, I'd probably say it's the weakest story out of all of them. I mean, just like the other campaigns, you get a comic strip basically and 2 sentences that say what's going on. And the sentences are basically, oh, you've run into this villain, go kill them. And you're like, why? And it's because you're the good guys, they're the bad guys. Okay, I guess, it's a lackluster story. for sure. I mean, I wouldn't even say lackluster. There is no story. And that's what I think Marvel Champions could really use. They need some story put into these campaigns at least. I wish they would put story into just the regular scenarios outside of the campaigns, but these campaigns could definitely use some story. But overall, it's a wonderful product. It's a good heroes, interesting scenarios and villains. It just could use more story, but it's going to get a 9 out of 10. So it's my favorite of the big box expansions by far. So it's great. I highly suggest it. Maybe I wouldn't suggest this as your first big box expansion if you are new to the game, because there are some little quirky things that you're going to have to know Marvel Champions pretty good in order to, or else you're going to be kind of confused. Even when I was playing this, and I've played this game 100 some times, I was having to look up like little idiosyncrasies, what activates when for these certain things. But yeah, it's a great thing. 9 out of 10, absolutely recommend it. But that will complete this review. So if you did enjoy this video, make sure to like and subscribe to see more weekly content from me, Shane, at the board meeting in the future. Hope you all have a wonderful day. Take care, everyone.